Hello, everybody. We all, as manufacturers, have a lot of time and engineering effort invested in this transition, as you could imagine. And it's an ongoing project as well. I think you'll see over the next few years a lot of additional options appearing, especially in those bands that Peter mentioned, that were recently reallocated and given to us for use as wireless microphone operators. But at the moment, we are still pretty much with the equipment we've been used to. So we have to kind of get to the point where there may be, in a few years, significantly different bands that we operate on and therefore different gear. But for now, we're going to continue using what works. What I like to start off saying, and I think it's kind of been implied, the sky didn't fall as a result of this particular auction. Little debris is coming down, but we're still okay. We're not going off the air. One of the things that happened when the original rules were published 2 years ago, roughly, a little over 2 years ago, the major manufacturers petitioned the FCC. It's a process they allow you to question or ask for reconsideration on certain parts and certain rules. And I know that most of these petitions went to the FCC in December of 2015. So imagine that all this time later, July 2017, they finally met and dealt with those petitions. And the results were very, very favorable, both for you as users and us as manufacturers. One of the most onerous things that had come out in the original rules was a redefinition of the spectral mask that wireless transmitters had to operate in. So the spectral mask is the shape of the RF energy when you look on a spectrum analyzer, how wide it is and how the energy is distributed within that spectrum, was established by the FCC many years ago. And interestingly, in this particular rule, it got extremely restrictive. They switched over technically to the rules that were in effect for Europe, called the ETSI mask, which is narrower, more narrow than the rules we had here. But somehow, on top of that new spectral mask, which would not have been very bad, just a change, they tacked on another spec which was related to the out-of-band emissions. So outside of that mask, the spec expanded out to infinity, both below and above your transmitter. The out-of-band emissions had to be minus 90 decibels or lower, all the way from DC to infinity, which would have meant that no gear that I know of with today's technology pretty much would be able to meet that particular spec. So that was one of the petitions. And thankfully, in July, just a couple of months ago, almost to the day, the FCC ruled in favor of our petition. They took out that extra DC through light minus 90 part of the rule. And now it merely reads that it must be the same as the European ETSI mask. So that was like, we broke out champagne, I know, at the factory. I wasn't there, but I broke out my own bottle of wine, and I had, a happy evening when I saw that news. So that means a lot less restriction, and the gear can be produced with today's technologies that you're used to using. The other thing there were a few things, but one of the other really important things was what happens to people with legacy transmitters. The ones you use today we'll call legacy because they're not part of the new rules. They were certified under the old rules. And again, another bottle of champagne came out because the rules changed back in our favor. Essentially, gear you own now that does not tune above 608 megahertz, that's channel 36, by the way, can still be used going forward without modification, without worry, still be legal. So in electro block terms, but sure, and Earscom have their own blocks, so I don't know them well. But in electro terms, blocks 470, 19, 20, 21, and 22 do not tune above 608. And in our newer bands, that's band A1, does not tune above 608. So if you own any of that, those frequency bands, nothing to think about, no worries. If you have a band B1 or blocks 23 through 26, they can, depending on their age and model, so you'd have to confer with our service department, but most of those will be able to be changed at the factory, either with just a firmware update and a new sticker that the FCC requires us to place on the transmitter, or a block change. So if you have a block 26, you could reblock it to be a block 20 or 19 or 8, one of the lower blocks. And it'll get a new sticker, it'll be in that new block, and you can continue to use that. The cost would be less, obviously, than purchasing brand new gear, and it saves you from having to throw out entirely anything that's above 608. So that was a great rule change, and again, we only learned that a couple of months ago. Peter, yes, sure.
Just have a quick question regarding that. What's the turnaround time to get it retuned?
It depends how fast you move, because what we think will probably happen is people, as the date approaches, will start waking up to the fact that they better get it done, and it'll get worse. Yeah, it'll get worse. So right now it's a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
But we are very flexible in terms, if you own multiple transmitters, for instance, you could send them in stages. You don't have to send them all at once. So with a little pre-planning, perhaps you can get through it. And we did touch on this through Peter's discussion. They did expand the eligibility for licensing in some cases. Before you had to be, Peter mentioned motion picture production, TV production, but now other types of entities, based on these new changes that came in July, will be eligible for licensing. So that doesn't touch too many people here, but if you do wireless in a church or Broadway theater, that production can be licensed. Okay. Well, that's interesting. There we go. This is just the verbiage. I'm not going to go over it. In the document, it explains the eligibility expansion. So we'll just let you look that up, or I'll be happy to share the slides with you. A few different entities have produced city-by-city spreadsheets. I spent quite a few days on one, and we posted it up at this resource URL on our website, so you're welcome to look at that. I have about 35 cities in there. And there are other cities that are not listed, but if you find yourself being sent to one of the cities that aren't listed, I suggest personally, excuse me, did I do that? I suggest this website, and this is a very interesting group of people. They're actually, the mother company of this website is Satellite Guys, but they're really RF geeks to the nth degree, and they created a site for TV viewing, which city by city, even longitude and latitude, you can actually find out at that exact point in space of that longitude, latitude, or by zip code if you want to be a little wider. They will give you back a spreadsheet. This isn't the exact one, but they have the data that'll tell you how strong the actual TV signal will be at that point, taking into account terrain, in other words, mountains and hills, and the distance from the transmitter site. So yes, the FCC database will tell you the list of stations. That's fine, but it does not give you any clue, really, to how strong that signal would be at the place you're working. You can get that information from rabbitears.com. Another page on their website, which is showing here, this is a screenshot, is a repack plan page. And there's over 200 market cities in that database. And as you look across the results for this, I put New York on this one. It shows you the list of stations. It's slightly truncated. The new channel is the first column. Their previous, their current or previous channel. These are live links that you could click on and get more information on the station, where they're located, who operates them, which phase of the changeover they go through, and you can see here they're all in phase 4 except WNET. So that's, that's important information. Oh, and LSS, linked station sets, you were showing the link. So it shows you which set of stations they're linked to, and then the construction permits and a map. So that website has given me tremendous service over the years, and I trust it as much as virtually any other resource. Now, for Lectrosonics, we have a strategy going forward, and we've known about the changeover for a while. So we've implemented, as I said, block change or firmware changes where appropriate. And I mentioned here, there's a special date that you must keep in mind in relation to equipment being sold and marketed. The middle of September 2018 changes everything. Nothing that's made right now without new approvals from the laboratories can be either marketed or sold after that date. So if there's a particular unit you would like to buy that hasn't yet been recertified, you could still buy it now. And as long as it doesn't tune above 608, you'll be able to use it as long as you want. But after the middle of September 2018, you will no longer have access to purchasing any of that gear. And because of that, it also makes sense if you're going to block change, do it before that date as well, because those circuit boards will be subject, the boards that we replace inside the units are subject to the same date and rules. That still gives you a little bit of time, but it's coming. You know how time goes, so yes.
Will there be a new band, like a B2 band that Lectro would offer, or?
That's being looked at,
Okay.
but there's nothing yet defined in stone. So I would imagine over the next few years a lot will change, but it'll be a while. We still have a few years to go before the end of the transition, which is July 2020 is the end of the transition. You've noticed, I'm sure, if you use our gear at least, that we've changed from the blocks in most of our gear, which were 25.6 megahertz wide, to a newer, wider tuning band, which is called A1, B1. C1 we've kind of abandoned when we heard about the auction because it was way too high in frequency, but A1 and B1 are our new bands, and they're each close, around 70 megahertz wide. We've also beefed up the front ends of our receivers, so tighter filters, higher overload or headroom, tighter filtering. So that's, as we pack things more tightly and we're working in tighter bands, these are front end issues that really will impact your range. We have a new IFB system in the VHF band. So that's about 174 to 215. It looks and operates almost identically to the one you've seen for many, many years. The R1A and T4 transmitters look pretty much exactly the same, other than the color of the knob has changed. So you'll know by looking at it whether it's the VHF or the UHF unit. We're trying to encourage people to consider moving the IFB down there because that'll leave you more white space, obviously, for actual microphones in the UHF band. So where that's possible, if you're getting a new system, you could consider. The only real downside that I've noticed is the antennas are longer or bigger, depending on the type of antenna you're using. But that's not usually mounted on a human being, so as far as the transmit antenna for IFB. So it shouldn't be too onerous to change to VHF. We have been offering IFB systems in 944 to 952 for a while. We're considering actually expanding other gear into that band. And in fact, the FCC has expanded the band to be 941 to 960, with a couple of little gaps in there, by the way. So it's not absolutely contiguous within that band, but the lower part between about 941 and 944 is shared with different federal agencies, so the coordination for the lower part of the band is more complicated than for the upper part of the band. by rules, the upper part of this band is supposedly coordinated by SBE, the Society of Broadcast Engineers. The lowest part, 941 to 944, will be coordinated by the SBE and the federal agencies that are involved with coordinating those bands. So it gets a little more complicated, but it's good spectrum because otherwise it's pretty clear everywhere. In most areas, that'll be open spectrum.
And is that only for Part 74 license holders?
That is only for license. Thank you, yeah. Another reason to get a license, it'll expand where you can operate. As far as IFB, we've come up with an interesting new system. This is the only real product thing I'm going to show to you today. I apologize because we're spectrum talk today, but our new IFB system, which is really, it was originally created as an IEM for musical applications. A lot of TV producers noticed it and said, wait a minute, that sounds like a great IFB system. And we kind of jiggered around with the firmware and software a little bit to make it actually very applicable either to stereo in-ear monitoring for music or IFB applications. So it's a fully digital system, fully digital RF, fully digital audio. That allow tighter channel spacing than our normal systems do. There's only one band, so the entire resulting UHF band post-spectrum is tuned by both the receiver and the transmitter. And each carrier wave, each RF transmission will have two channels. So obviously for stereo, you need two channels. But you could also split it and use them as two separate mono channels. So it's one transmitter in a sense, could be the same as two IFB. Actually, there's more. There's two carriers in each transmitter, and each of those two can be a separate IFB channel. So one transmitter, there's the transmitter on the bottom there. One of those has two carrier waves. Each one of those is either stereo or dual mono. So you have two stereo IEMs or four IFBs or any combination. So a stereo IEM and two IFBs, two mono IFBs. So there's a lot more that happens in less spectrum because of that. And if you put two together, they're half racks, so you could rack two up. You'll have four carriers, each with two. So you could have 8 IFBs in one RU, or 4 stereo, et cetera. All the combinations are still possible. So we've had this out on a couple of big concerts. I was out at Jones Beach with this, and with Foreigner, for instance, and we were beta testing there. So this is going to be appearing actually within a week or two, and we're going to start to take orders on that. So that's another way to kind of get more in the same spectrum. Yeah?
Is there a field transmitter in the works?
Not yet. Not yet.
And what's the latency on this?
About 2 milliseconds. Yeah. We've also introduced a portable field recorder, which doesn't transmit, but can be used as a plant recorder. People use it in the visors of their cars, you know, wherever wireless might not be appropriate or practical. That's an interesting, it's the size of a transmitter, essentially. Peter did touch on this. This is really a repeat of what you said as far as the available spectrum, so I won't go into it.
1.4 gig is worth talking about.
1.4 gig. So that's not actually that new, but that's a spectrum that is controlled by an interesting organization, and I never remember the acronym and how to expand it, but it's AFTRAC, AFTRRC, right? It's the Federal Telemetry Tracking for Aeronautical Testing and Flights. So there's an agency that exists. It's a private company, but it's in charge of coordinating the use of that spectrum. And even though the spectrum goes from 1435 to 1525 megahertz, the rules will now allow up to 30 megahertz of that spectrum to be assigned to an event for wireless microphone use. So that's sort of interesting. It'll be on a city-by-city basis, and there'll be very tight control of it by AFTRAC, because after all, you don't want to interfere with a missile test or, you know, other things that could be messy. Yeah. So, but given that, I think you'll find it becomes a viable band in certain situations, depending on how you use wireless. It has been in use for quite a while. For instance, in Super Bowls, there's a way to apply at the current time. There's a way to apply for a special temporary license, STA. But now it's going to become a little more, it'll be like registering in the white space database in a sense. And AFTRAC will look at the registrations and either approve or disapprove. But if they approve, you can then, for that event, use your wireless in the 1.4 gigahertz band.
What time frame? 2 days ahead, a week ahead? What's the?
They haven't completed those details yet. So at the moment, the best thing is to use the special temporary licensing scheme, which is a little bit complicated and tricky, but there are people who know how to do that. Jim, have you ever used 1.4?
No, I don't use it.
No. We can put you in touch with some people if that ever becomes useful to you, but eventually it'll be just more or less a database log, and Shure has been, I think, more than any company, the most proactive in getting that. So you may talk about that later in your presentation? Okay,
Yeah.
You'll hear more about it, so I won't dwell on that. Best practices. So part of our approach really is education, and I'm running basically a little bit over, so I'm not going through all of this. We can do that another time or privately. But I think end users are going to have to become much more educated and more following the rules, you know, by the book in a sense. I mean, we've all done things like this. I've seen this numerous times. You set up your sound cart in the street, but the action's inside a restaurant or something. That's great, you know, but if things get very, very tight and you still need that range, you might have to find a way to get the antennas indoors when in the past you got away with certain things that were great, but no longer it just might not be possible anymore. So best practices in all the other ways, you know, what choices of antennas and coax, how you use splitters and bandpass filters, all of that will play more into the mix coming up than it had to before. So we'll do more. I'm sure Gotham will be doing more educational things, and Lectrosonics will be too. And that's what we're available for. You can call me personally at any time, and I know all the other reps are very, very interested in helping you all out and getting the best results from your wireless, whoever it is. So I'm over. So I'm going to end there. I did cover all my important points, and later on, and in questions and answers, I'm available.